Incredible story. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity interviews gone wrong. Now, let's get into what really happened behind the scenes of this shocking confrontation. The morning started like any other at the View studio. Richard Gere had arrived early, looking impeccable in his tailored navy suit, ready to promote his latest film project. He had done countless interviews over his decades in Hollywood, and this was supposed to be just another friendly chat show appearance. The makeup artist touched up his face while he reviewed his talking points, completely unaware that he was walking into what would become a verbal battlefield. Joy Behar entered the studio with her usual confident stride, but there was something different about her demeanor that morning. Sources backstage later revealed she had been in heated discussions with producers about the direction of the show, and she seemed particularly on edge. As she settled into her chair at the iconic table, she shuffled through her notes with an intensity that made the crew members exchange worried glances. The show began, normally enough, with the standard pleasantries and introductions. Richard Gere smiled warmly at the audience, waving as they applauded his entrance. He had always been known for his gracious public persona, and today seemed no different as he took his seat across from the panel of hosts. "Richard, it's wonderful to have you here," Whoopi Goldberg began with her characteristic warmth. "Tell us about your new project." Gere leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped comfortably. "Thank you for having me, Whoopi. I'm excited to talk about this film because it really explores themes of redemption and second chances, something I think we all need more of in today's world." The conversation flowed smoothly for the first few minutes, with questions about his co-stars and the filming process. But then Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression shifting to something more predatory. "Richard, I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me," Joy interrupted, her voice cutting through the friendly atmosphere like a blade. "You've made a career playing the romantic lead, the heartthrob, but don't you think it's time to acknowledge that maybe those days are behind you?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operator seemed to freeze as the unexpected hostility hung in the air. Richard's smile faltered for just a moment before he composed himself. "I'm sorry, Joy, but I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at," he replied, his tone still measured but with a slight edge creeping in. Joy leaned back in her chair with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, come on, Richard, you're not getting any younger. Isn't it a bit ridiculous for a man your age to still be playing romantic leads opposite women half your age? Don't you think audiences are getting tired of the same old formula?" The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the direction any of them had expected the interview to take, and you could see the concern on their faces as they realized Joy was going completely off script. Richard's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Joy, I think you might be misunderstanding both my career choices and my current projects. The film we're discussing today actually features an age-appropriate love story with an incredibly talented actress who happens to be close to my own age." "But that's not really the point, is it?" Joy pressed on, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was creating. "The point is that Hollywood has this obsession with older men staying in romantic roles while older women get pushed aside, and you've been part of that problem for decades." The tension in the studio was becoming unbearable. Richard's publicist, who was watching from the side, looked like she was ready to step in and end the interview. But Richard held up a slight hand, signaling that he could handle this himself. "Joy, I understand you're trying to make a point about ageism in Hollywood, and it's actually something I agree with," Richard said, his voice remaining calm but firm. "But I find it interesting that you're choosing to attack me personally rather than having a constructive conversation about the industry as a whole." Joy's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like triumph. "Attack you? Richard, this is journalism. This is asking the hard questions that your usual softball interviews don't cover. Or are you saying you can't handle a little honest criticism?" The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the typical lighthearted banter that The View was known for. This was becoming a personal confrontation, and everyone could feel it. Richard took a deep breath, and for the first time since sitting down, his famous composure showed the smallest crack. "Joy, there's a difference between asking hard questions and being deliberately provocative for the sake of creating drama. Right now, I'm not sure which one you're doing." "Oh, so now I'm being dramatic?" Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Maybe the problem is that you're not used to being challenged. Maybe you're so used to people kissing up to you that you can't handle it when someone tells you the truth." The other hosts were looking between Joy and Richard like spectators at a tennis match, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Whoopi cleared her throat as if to speak, but Joy continued her assault. You know what I think, Richard? I think you've been living in a bubble for so long that you've lost touch with reality. You think you can just waltz in here, promote your little movie, and have everyone fawn over you like it's still 1980. Richard's hands, which had been resting calmly on the table, slowly clenched into fists. His voice, when he spoke, was still controlled, but there was steel in it now. Joy, I came here as a guest on your show, with respect for you and your colleagues. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's not even entertainment. It's just mean-spirited. Joy laughed, but it was a harsh sound with no humor in it. Mean-spirited? Or am I just the first person in years who's been willing to tell you something other than what you want to hear? The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Richard Gere's expression shifted from polite tolerance to something much more dangerous. The famous actor, known for his Buddhist philosophy and calm demeanor, was clearly reaching his breaking point, but Joy Behar seemed oblivious to the warning signs. You know what, Joy? Richard said, his voice dropping to a lower register that somehow made it more intimidating than if he had shouted. You're absolutely right about one thing. I am used to being treated with basic human decency, especially when I'm a guest on someone's show. Apparently, that's too much to ask here. Joy's eyes gleamed with what looked like satisfaction. She had drawn blood, and she wasn't about to back down now. Basic human decency? Is that what you call it when interviewers don't ask you the tough questions? When they let you control the narrative? Tough questions? Richard repeated, and for the first time, there was a hint of incredulity in his voice. Joy, you haven't asked me a single substantive question about my work, my craft, or even the issues you claim to care about. You've just been taking personal shots. Sunny Hostin tried to interject. Maybe we could talk about the film's themes. But Joy cut her off with a dismissive wave. No, I think this is exactly what we need to be talking about. Richard, let me ask you this. When was the last time you took a role that actually challenged you as an actor, instead of just playing the same charming leading man? Richard's laugh was short and bitter. You want to know about challenging roles, Joy? I've spent years doing independent films that barely made it to theaters because they dealt with difficult subjects. I've worked with directors who were more interested in telling important stories than making money. But I don't think you've done your homework on any of that. Oh, please, Joy scoffed. Spare me the artistic integrity speech. We all know what pays your bills, and it's not those little art house films. And what exactly is wrong with being successful? Richard shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack. What is wrong with entertaining people while also trying to do meaningful work? Why does everything have to be reduced to this cynical take? Joy leaned forward aggressively. Because, Richard, success in Hollywood often comes at the expense of honesty. And right now, you're sitting here pretending to be this deep, thoughtful artist, when really, you're just another pretty face who got lucky. The gasp from the audience was audible. Even by the View's standards of controversial moments, this was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. Whoopi looked like she was about to step in, but Richard held up his hand again. You know what, Joy? Richard said, his voice now carrying a dangerous calm. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with some of the most talented directors and actors in the world. I've had failures and successes, and I've learned from both. But in all that time, I have never encountered someone so determined to tear down a guest for no apparent reason other than personal satisfaction. Joy's response was immediate and cutting. Personal satisfaction? Richard, this is about accountability. This is about calling out the privilege and entitlement that you and actors like you have been coasting on for decades. Privilege and entitlement? Richard repeated, and now his voice was rising. Joy, do you have any idea what you're talking about? Do you know anything about my background, where I came from, what I've had to work for? I know enough, Joy replied smugly. I know you've been handed opportunities that others never get. I know you've benefited from a system that favors certain types of people over others. Richard's eyes flashed dangerously. You don't know anything about me. You don't know that I grew up in a working-class family in upstate New York. You don't know that I worked construction jobs and waited tables while trying to make it as an actor. You don't know about the years of rejection and struggle before I got my first real break. Oh, boo-hoo, Joy said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Poor little rich movie star had to work hard. How tragic. The other hosts were now looking genuinely alarmed. This had gone far beyond acceptable television, and they all knew it. But neither Joy nor Richard seemed willing to back down. "You know what your problem is, Joy?" Richard said, leaning forward now, his composure completely abandoned. "Your problem is that you've become so bitter and cynical that you can't see anything good in anyone. You sit here every day tearing down people who have worked hard and achieved something because it makes you feel better about your own choices." Joy's face flushed red. "How dare you psychoanalyze me? You don't know anything about my choices or my life." "Then stop psychoanalyzing mine," Richard shot back. "Stop pretending that you know who I am or what I've done based on whatever tabloid nonsense you've read." "I don't need tabloids to see what's right in front of me," Joy fired back. An aging actor who can't accept that his time has passed, desperately clinging to relevance. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stared at Joy for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet but filled with a cold fury that was somehow more frightening than shouting. "You know, Joy, I came here today with respect for this show and for you as a person. I believe that despite our different perspectives, we could have a civil conversation. But what you've shown me today is that you're not interested in conversation. You're not interested in understanding. You're only interested in cruelty." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Richard wasn't finished. "And the saddest part is that you seem to think this makes you some kind of truth teller, some brave journalist asking the hard questions. But all you're really doing is bullying a guest on your show because you know I can't walk out without creating an even bigger scene." "Nobody's stopping you from leaving," Joy said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Richard smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "You're right, Joy. Nobody is stopping me. And you know what? Maybe it's time I did exactly that." The tension in the studio was now so thick, it was almost suffocating. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of this unprecedented meltdown. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether they were witnessing great television or a complete disaster. "But before I do," Richard continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of his anger, "let me ask you something, Joy. When you go home tonight and think about this conversation, are you going to be proud of how you treated someone who came here as your guest? Are you going to feel good about the person you were today?" Joy's mouth opened and closed, but for the first time in the entire exchange, she seemed at a loss for words. The tables had turned, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The studio remained frozen in that moment of stunned silence, with Joy Behar struggling to find her voice for the first time in what seemed like her entire career. But Richard Gere wasn't done. The floodgates had opened, and decades of experience dealing with difficult personalities in Hollywood were about to come pouring out. "I can see from your expression that you're not used to being questioned yourself," Richard continued, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had finally decided to stop playing defense. "You're used to being the one asking the questions, making the accusations, putting people on the spot. But how does it feel when the tables are turned?" Joy finally found her voice, though it came out shakier than before. "Richard, I think you're overreacting. This is what we do here. We have honest conversations." "Honest?" Richard laughed, and it was a sound filled with genuine disbelief. "Joy, there's been nothing honest about this conversation. You came into this with an agenda, and it had nothing to do with my film or my career. This was personal from the moment you opened your mouth." Whoopi Goldberg made another attempt to regain control. "Maybe we should take a commercial break." "No," Richard said firmly, holding up his hand without taking his eyes off Joy. "I think we need to finish this conversation. Because Joy here seems to think she's performing some kind of public service by attacking her guests." Joy's composure was clearly rattled, but she tried to rally. "I'm not attacking anyone. I'm asking legitimate questions about Hollywood and aging and—" "Stop," Richard interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like a knife. "Just stop. We both know that's not what this was about. You want to know what I think this is really about, Joy?" Joy stared at him, her mouth slightly open, clearly not expecting this turn in the conversation. "I think this is about jealousy," Richard continued, his words measured and deliberate. "I think you look at someone like me, someone who has managed to maintain a career and find fulfillment in their work, and it bothers you. Because maybe you're not as happy with your own choices as you pretend to be." "How dare you?" Joy started, but her voice lacked its earlier fire. "How dare I what? Suggest that maybe the person who spends her days criticizing others might have some issues of her own to work through?" Richard's voice was gaining strength. "Joy, I've been watching you for years, and this is what you do. You tear people down because it makes you feel better about yourself. The other hosts were exchanging glances, clearly uncomfortable but also seemingly mesmerized by what was unfolding. This was television history in the making, and they all knew it. Sarah Haynes tried to interject with a nervous laugh. Maybe we could talk about something lighter. But Richard wasn't finished. You know what the really sad part is, Joy? You actually have a platform here where you could do some good. You could have meaningful conversations with interesting people. You could explore important issues, but instead, you choose to use your power to humiliate guests who come here in good faith. Joy's face was now flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. I don't have to sit here and listen to this amateur psychology session from an actor who thinks he's some kind of wise guru. There it is again, Richard said, pointing at her. Another personal attack instead of actually addressing what I'm saying. Do you even hear yourself, Joy? Do you realize that every response you give just proves my point? The audience was completely captivated now. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. This was a masterclass in how to handle a bully when you finally decide to fight back. You want to talk about being out of touch? Richard continued, his voice building in intensity. Let's talk about how out of touch you are with basic human decency. Let's talk about how you think it's acceptable to invite someone onto your show just to tear them apart for your own entertainment. Joy tried to regain her footing. Richard, you're being dramatic. This is television. This is what we do. No, Joy, this is what you do, Richard shot back. And the fact that you think this behavior is normal or acceptable says everything anyone needs to know about your character. The camera operators were adjusting their angles, making sure they captured every moment of this unprecedented exchange. The show's producers in the control room were probably having heart attacks, but they knew they couldn't cut away from this. I want to ask you something else, Joy, Richard said, leaning back in his chair but keeping his eyes locked on hers. When you wake up in the morning, is this really who you want to be? Someone who gets their kicks from making other people uncomfortable? Someone who confuses cruelty with courage? Joy's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. I don't think I'm cruel. Then you have less self-awareness than I thought? Richard replied. Because what you did today, what you're doing right now, is the definition of cruelty. You're using your position of power to attack someone who came here as your guest. Sunny Hostin made another attempt to redirect. Richard, your new film deals with themes of forgiveness. Actually, Sunny, that's perfect, Richard said, turning to her with a slight smile. Because that's exactly what this is about. Joy here seems to think that being unforgiving, being cynical, being cruel somehow makes her more honest or more real. But all it really does is make her smaller. Joy finally exploded. I am not cruel, I'm not small, I'm trying to have real conversations instead of the usual celebrity puff pieces. By ambushing your guests? Richard fired back. By attacking them personally? By making assumptions about their lives and their motivations without knowing anything about them? That's your idea of a real conversation? I know enough about you, Joy insisted, though her voice was losing steam. You know nothing about me, Richard said with finality. You know what you've read in magazines and what you've decided to believe based on your own prejudices. But you know nothing about who I am as a person, what I've been through, or what I care about. Joy tried one more time to regain control. I know you're sitting here lecturing me about how to do my job. I'm not lecturing you about your job, Joy. I'm trying to remind you about basic human decency, Richard interrupted. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being a bully. There's a difference between journalism and cruelty. And right now, you're showing everyone exactly which side of that line you're on. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the cameras whirring. Joy sat there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, clearly struggling to find a response that would salvage the situation. You know what, Joy? Richard said, his voice suddenly becoming calmer, more philosophical. I actually feel sorry for you. Because this is how you choose to spend your time? This is how you choose to use your influence. Tearing people down instead of building them up. And that must be a very sad way to live. Joy's eyes were now glistening with what might have been tears of frustration or embarrassment. I don't need your pity. It's not pity, Joy. It's compassion, which is something you might want to try sometime, Richard said, standing up from his chair. I think we're done here. Whoopi quickly stood as well. Richard, please don't go. We can move on to other topics. Richard turned to Whoopi with a genuine smile. Whoopi, I have nothing but respect for you and for this show. But I won't sit here and be a punching bag for someone who has clearly confused meanness with intelligence. He began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and dignified. "Joy, I hope someday you figure out that being cruel doesn't make you brave, and being cynical doesn't make you wise. It just makes you someone that people don't want to be around." Joy made one final attempt to salvage her position. "Richard, if you can't handle a little criticism—" "Joy," Richard said, turning back to her one last time, "what happened here today wasn't criticism, it was character assassination. And the fact that you still don't see the difference is exactly the problem." With that, he handed his microphone to a stunned stage manager and walked toward the exit. The cameras followed him as he moved with the same grace and dignity he had shown throughout his career, even in this moment of conflict. Just before he reached the studio door, he turned back one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. I hope you'll still consider seeing the film because it's actually about the importance of treating each other with kindness and respect, something we could all use a little more of." And with that, Richard Gere walked out of the View studio, leaving behind one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. Joy Behar sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that she had just been completely dismantled by someone who had simply refused to accept her bullying behavior. The aftermath of this explosive exchange left everyone talking. What started as a routine promotional interview had turned into a masterclass on standing up to bullies and maintaining dignity under fire. Richard Gere had shown that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to accept it. So what do you think about